time for this conversation. I'm going to bring out our two guests. First, we have creator and executive producer Michael Grassi. And also producer Zachary Quinto. Thank you both for joining.
That's all I need.
So we were talking right before we came out. I did a Q&A with the two of you and two of your co-stars back in September, I think. I think it was like 2 weeks before the premiere, which I imagine could have been like a very stressful time when you're not sure how the show is going to come across. A full season later, you're renewed for season 2. Congratulations to that. But my first question for you is, what has kind of surprised you the most about how audiences have connected with the show?
What do you think, Michael?
You know, I don't know if it's a surprise, but something that's been really rewarding about how audiences connected is our producing director, Demaine Davis, live tweets every episode, and we still call it Twitter. And then she says that as she's live tweeting, people are sort of being like, I have this, or I've dealt with this, or I've been through this, and then someone else is replying to that tweet, they're like, I've been through this too, and then two people are connecting, and suddenly what we sort of intended to do with the show, which is tell people they're not alone, like people are connecting and talking about sort of things that they may have kept hidden in the past, and I feel like that's very much in line with what Oliver Sacks would have wanted, so we're very proud of that.
I think we've always said that if people see themselves in the stories that we're telling on the show, then we're really doing our job, and I would echo that. I mean, people that I've met along the way who either themselves have dealt with some of the issues, or I think the other interesting thing is that it doesn't obviously only affect the patient, right? It also affects the people who are in the lives of those patients, and so I think that's a big part of it as well. People see family members or loved ones in the stories that we're telling, even if they're not exactly dialed into the specific case. You know, there are reverberations.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, I'm very curious to go back to the very beginning, what really inspired you about Oliver Sacks when you were reading about him and his work and thinking about how to develop this into a show?
I fell in love with Oliver Sacks the way many Oliver Sacks fans have for many, many years. But I really was interested in his approach to medicine and how he saw patients. I think we've had a lot of television, which I'm a fan of so many of these shows, where it's the emergency department and doctors are coming in and dealing with patients for minutes at a time and then moving on to the next, and it's high urgency. And what really drew me in about Oliver Sacks and his approach was he spent time with his patients. He listened to them, he got to know them, and it was never a one-size-fits-all prescription. It was sort of, how do I help this person move forward, even when I can't heal them? How do I help them live their best life? It was sort of it's sort of this like personal care and this dedication and this curiosity and this obsession that made him so fascinating. And Zach brings it to life so brilliantly with all of those things. Especially, I love Zach's curiosity and his wit, and it's been really exciting.
Zach, what was your experience kind of getting to know who Oliver Sacks was when you were preparing for this role?
Yeah, I knew a little bit about him, but not that much, to be honest. And I feel like the things that drew me in the deepest were the writing that he did about himself and his own experiences, and the writing about him as a person, because obviously I was about to play a character who's based on him. But it's such a gift as an actor, though, to have all of this source material and all of this inspiration, and then to also be able to apply it to a fictional character. You know, I'm not trying to do some kind of a impersonation or an embodiment of Oliver Sacks. I'm really taking so many of his most inspiring and most interesting qualities and applying them to a character who exists in a modern day environment, surrounded by circumstances and people and situations which are ultimately very different than the ones the real life Oliver Sacks was surrounded by. So his memoir On the Move was, I really dove into that and spent a lot of time in that. I found it fascinating from a psychological perspective, an emotional perspective. He's written many articles about his journeys into psychonaut exploration, and he did a lot of psychedelics. He was always driven by really wanting to understand his patients as fully as he could, and if taking some drugs was going to help him do that, it was something that he did frequently, especially in his youth, and he wrote extensively about it. I found that fascinating. He gave many interviews, TED Talks, podcasts. I mean, there's no shortage of opportunities to understand who he was, and so I did that. That to me was more compelling than, and I certainly read The Man Who Took His Wife for Had, and excerpts from Anthropologist on Mars and Musicophilia and different writings, clinical writings that he did, the case studies, because those are obviously incredibly fascinating, but less applicable for me personally, because those are the things that I know Michael and the writers really pour over and dive into, and then turn them into our scripts, which then I'm able to say, oh, this is a case from this book, and then I go read that case. But to me, it was really always more fascinating to read about the man and what the man himself wrote about himself.
Right. He actually had face blindness,
Yeah.
which your character also has. I'm very curious, Michael, maybe you can talk about what that, kind of the exciting thing that you can make a character, like kind of an idiosyncratic trait for a character in that respect. And then Zachary, I'm curious, how does that affect like how you play a scene with a scene partner?
Right. Do you want to talk first? You go first. Well, prosopagnosia, face blindness, is it's difficult to play, because the only person who knows that you have it is you. You know, like if you're watching a scene. So I did read a lot about it, and what I came to realize is that people with the condition have certain techniques that they employ in order to get around it, right? And so much of our show and the cases on our show are about circumnavigation, because that's what our brains are actually able to do. They're able to circumnavigate limitations. Our brains are, I mean, it's just such an endless wealth of inspiration and possibility. And so I really focused on the workarounds, right? So what does someone's voice sound like? You know, what is their hairline? How are their attached earlobes? Or, you know, like, do they have a prominent eye? Like, there are things to do that I would sort of implement into scenes that I was playing early on. And then it's the kind of thing where someone with a condition, eventually, I get familiar enough to know who you are, what you smell like, what you sound like, what you look like in other ways. So it is a kind of unique thing to try to layer into a character, though.
Yeah, it's kind of immersive when you think about
Yes.
the other senses that he's experienced.
Correct, yeah, right.
And Zach, you did an amazing job. Like, I feel like there's so many scenes where I can see you searching for it, and then you find it, and that's so satisfying and fun to watch. But from a story perspective, I think exploring face blindness really felt like an opportunity to show that Oliver Sacks, or Wolf, felt like he was other. And I feel like he's able to approach his patients because he kind of knows what it's like to not see the world like everyone else sees the world. And from another angle, we always talk about Wolf as sort of his life is one big misconnection, because he enters the world, and if he's in public, he never knows if he'll be passing somebody that he met the previous day that he had a connection with, because it's overwhelming when you're in big crowds, and that just feels so Oliver Wolf, who is sort of this lone wolf, you know, and I think the face blindness plays a big part of that.
And it was a real opportunity as well for our directors and our DPs to create a visual language, which I think they did a really beautiful job doing. Lee Cullen Krieger, who directed our first 2 episodes of season 1, and also especially Harry Dearden, who directed the 12th episode of the season, where there's a big event that Wolf has to go to and is searching for people, and there's a lot of, so it was really cool to watch how creatively the creative team came up with a visual vocabulary that helped audiences understand what it might be like to have that condition in particular.
Michael, I'm very curious too. You know, obviously most of the show is set in a hospital. It's kind of a workplace where you find all these characters interacting with each other. But how do you think about crafting the characters when they're outside of the hospital and who they are? Is there what's your process with that, and especially with Dr. Wolf?
Yeah, one of my favorite things about the show is we get to leave the hospital with the doctors, and their lives just don't exist within those 4 walls, and we sort of get to show that they're people too, because often in the patient-doctor relationship, you can forget that a doctor is a person too in that power dynamic. And I think everyone to some extent, even doctors, are dealing with their mental health in big ways, in small ways, in all sorts of ways. I think it's something that everyone can connect to. So I think leaving the hospital was able to sort of give you this larger scope into what their lives are and what their work is. And I feel like that also speaks to Oliver Sacks and his life. And it's just, it wasn't just in the hospital. This man had so many obsessions and so many fascinations, and then getting to dig into all of that with Oliver's amazing.
In terms of, you know, kind of, I don't want to call it case of the week, sensibility of the show, but, you know, we have these very specific, if there's a
All
documentary,
of the one of the things we have.
you know, how do you find the inspiration for kind of the weekly storylines? Are they things that came directly from Oliver Sacks' work, or are you working with other kind of medical professionals who have, you know, the talent of knowing what these kind of crazy symptoms, issues are?
It's a really good question. So it's a mix. So we use Oliver Sacks' real case studies in the show, and then we also work with a neurosurgeon who consults with us. We have a doctor, her name is Danielle Alamas, who is a writer, who's in the writer's room with us, so we also pull from other real-life cases. And whenever we're looking at these cases, we really try to look at them through our lens, which is the lens of mental health. And we don't think of it as a medical procedural, we actually think of it as an emotional procedural. It's very much about the humanity of the person instead of looking at them as a patient. And that really gives us our sort of spin on the medical drama that feels like we're really unlocking who the people are instead of a diagnosis, if that makes sense.
I mean, you kind of describe it as like what we hope every doctor is like in real life, kind of aspirational, you know, the trip to the hospital. Was that crossing your mind as you were writing it? Like, this is kind of, you're creating, I don't know, like the perfect situation between a doctor and patient.
Well, there is absolute wish fulfillment in having a doctor like Oliver Wolf. But at the same time, this doctor did exist. This doctor who was this passionate did exist. And I think about this a lot, but taking the time and taking the resources that Oliver takes is a rare thing. And it's something that I think we all wish we could have, but may never have. So yes, there's an element of wish fulfillment, but I think as we continue to explore the story, we're going to be telling what that cost is to Wolf, what that cost is to Bronx General to be a doctor like him, you know? I think the saying is you can either do a little for many or a lot for few or something like that, but I think Wolf is very much a quantity over quality kind of doctor, you know?
Zach, you also talk about kind of playing a character based on Oliver Sacks very authentically. Oliver Sacks was gay, openly gay, or maybe at least towards the end of his life, yes.
Right.
But Dr. Wolf, I think, is the first leading role on a medical show who is openly gay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to what that means to you, or you know, did you think about that going into it? As like, you can bring some authenticity to this.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is a big deal about it is that it's just not a big deal, first of all. I mean, it's one aspect of the character, but it's not the only aspect of the character that defines him. He's a really fully fleshed out and complex and dynamic person in and of himself. That happens to be one element of it. I think another thing that I have spent time thinking about is, maybe tragedy is too strong a word, but the sacrifice that Oliver Sacks made in his life. I mean, he was a renowned and brilliant neurologist who recognized that if he stepped into his authentic self fully, his opportunities to contribute to his field would be limited. And so there is something quite powerful for me to be at this place in my life and in my career to know that I can step fully into my authentic self and be who I am and not have my opportunities be limited, but in fact have them be amplified by playing a role like this. And so there is this kind of cyclical, there's a great honor in the cyclical nature of that, right? That I live in a time and am alive in a world where that's possible, and I'm able to tell a version of a story of what would it have been like if Oliver Sacks might have lived in this time, and what kind of doctor might he have been able to be if he was able to bring all of his relationships to bear. As it was, he was celibate for 30 years of his life. And I think that in many ways that was a sacrifice that he made because he knew that he was singularly able to make the contributions that he otherwise might not have been able to make.
Right. If I may add to that, beautifully
Please do.
answered, Zach. We work very closely with the Oliver Sacks estate, and Kate Edgar currently runs the Oliver Sacks estate, and she was one of his closest friends and colleagues, and she helped him write many of his books. That's definitely but one of the things she told me in one of our first conversations was that a lot of her life's work was, yes, helping Oliver write, but also trying to find a safe place for him in this world where he could feel comfortable being himself. And she encouraged him to move to the West Village, and she just really wanted him to feel safe. And it took a very long time, and he came out very, very late in life. But she said that Brilliant Minds and working on Brilliant Minds, she feels like this show is finally the safe space that she's always wanted for him. And yes, it was a very emotional conversation, and that's something I'm very proud of. It is sort of this wish fulfillment of what if Oliver had been able to come out younger in his life. Because when he came out, when he was young, it was actually illegal to be gay in the UK. So that's what he was dealing with. Yeah.
The last time we talked, it was before the show premiered, so I couldn't ask about Donna Murphy because it's still a secret. So you've worked with her previously, right?
I worked with Donna Murphy when I was 12 years old.
Okay.
So like 30 some years ago.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So her playing your mom in this way
It
is
was
kind of,
very, very full circle
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
surreal in many ways. Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that. Kind of to wrap things up, again, you've been renewed for a second season. I'm very curious if both of you could say kind of what you're most excited about for the next chapter of this.
I mean, I am just genuinely so grateful that we get to continue telling these stories, and that Michael gets to build on this foundation that he's laid so strongly and so collaboratively. I mean, it's been such a joy, and everybody that works on the show actually is so wonderful. And so honestly, for me, I feel grateful to the network for, investing in us at a time when I know there's so much upheaval in our business and our industry, and to really kind of double down on what's possible with the storytelling. Because I think, for me, season 1 was watching Michael set the table, and I really feel like in season 2 we're going to get to sit down and have a meal, and I'm really, really excited at what that means. And yes, for the patients and the stories about, the cases that we explore, but really for who these people are. And that's sort of the whiffs that I'm catching from what, he's telling me so far. And I don't want to know too much, but I want to know just enough before I share it.
Yeah. Can you say what's going to be on the dinner table?
I mean, it's going to be meaty, is what I can say. No, I meant just to
as far as possible.
Just to echo Zachary, I think it's an honor and an opportunity, and a lot of my favorite shows had really good season 1s, and then they really stepped into their power in season 2 and into their own, and I think that's going to be us. I feel like we're going to not only meet the bar, but exceed it, and I can't wait to do it.
I can't wait to see it, and thank you again, and congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks for
Hey, Zach.